Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Fixes This. And I have with me two amazing journalists slash media people from Bitcoin Magazine, Aaron Van Wirdum and David Bailey. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, Jimmy.
Hey, thank you. And hey, just to clarify, I am not a journalist. Aaron is the only journalist on the call.
I think David and I were both kind of laughing when you said that.
Okay, well, that's okay. Because the word journalist kind of doesn't mean that much anymore. I don't know if you guys would agree, but the state of journalism is just like very different than what it was, say, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, journalism was always like an open profession, right? It was never a thing where you needed to have some sort of specific qualification to be a journalist. Everyone always could call themselves a journalist. It's easier nowadays to self-publish, but I don't think that's what you're getting at. Like, I would say it's actually there's more journalists now, but maybe the term journalism or journalist has gone out of fashion. That's more what you're getting at, I think, Jimmy. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm just talking about sort of what we used to think of as journalists, the people that we saw on TV that had certain standards on truth and things like that. That seems to have changed. I don't know what your perspective on this is.
I don't know if there was really ever a standard. I think just the illusion of the standard has changed. And I mean, maybe there was a standard. I mean, I'm not a media guy. I'm not a journalist. Like I am an amateur that stumbled into media by accident, not even truly with intention. But yeah, I think now I think journalist is really like a priest of types. It's a gatekeeper of reality, and I think that as you have more and more voices that have entered the town square, what is reality is a contentious topic, and I think that the people who had the power of being that gatekeeper are losing it, and they don't like it.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because traditional media has certainly lost a lot of, their audience at the very least. You look at the ratings of almost any TV show, you look at the circulation of any newspaper or magazine, and all of those have gone down tremendously. And in its place, we've gotten a lot more, independent journalists off of YouTube, on X now, and Rumble even. What's going on here, and how did it get so strange so fast?
Aaron,
I mean, I'll just sort of spitball on this premise. So actually, when I studied journalism, so that's like 15 to 20 years ago or something like that, there was the internet was just sort of coming up, and internet journalism was just sort of starting to come up, and especially like bloggers at that time and blogs that were starting to compete with old media, so to say. And within the sort of school of journalism where I studied, that was sort of frowned upon in a way, or not seen as something positive necessarily. And my sort of graduating thesis kind of took the opposite approach in a way, where what I was arguing at that time was that I thought that the alternative media that were sort of upcoming could be a way to be sort of a check on the mainstream media. So in the same way that journalism or the media itself is seen as a check on politics, for example, there should also be a check on journalism. So my vision was sort of that the alternative media, bloggers could be sort of a check on that. Like if media aren't doing their job or aren't focusing on a specific topic enough, then there was now more room to sort of correct that in a way, right? Now, fast forward 20 years later, I do think that's partly happening. Like there's some of that, but it's also becoming so sort of dispersed. That's the right English word, right? That everyone's sort of finding their own niche, their own thing that they like and their own websites and their own perspective. And there isn't even sort of this single thing anymore. There isn't even this mainstream anymore. Like the mainstream is kind of disappearing. So it's not, it's less and less serving as a check on the mainstream, but just the mainstream is sort of dissolving into all these separate islands. I don't know if that's only a good thing. I'm really not sure if that's only a good thing. So if you don't mind me, I'll just keep rambling for a bit. All right, so in the Netherlands, this actually was the case for a while. So we called that the verzuiling. And so the country was really divided in the sense that so there were the Protestants, there were the Catholics, and I think just the non-religious. And they had their own newspapers, they had their own schools, they had their own churches, obviously. And it was really a very disconnected society that didn't communicate with each other. And there was something dysfunctional about that. And then with the emergence of the television, there was such a popular medium that people from these different parts started to watch the same things. So really for the first time, they started hearing each other's information and seeing each other's point of view. And there was sort of a unifying aspect to that, where everyone sort of found a sort of common ground truth. And I do think that's also healthy. I think it's healthy if people can find a common truth that everyone can sort of agree on and base their policies on, and sort of, you have to run a society in a way, and you have to run a society. You have to live together. So it's kind of good if you have that. And now we're sort of seeing the opposite happening, where everyone's finding their own island, and we're seeing the early stages of that. I don't know where that's going to lead. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing all across the board. I think there's downsides to that. It's good if people hear each other's perspectives and opinions and keep talking and settle on some sort of common truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on that, I agree that there are some pretty big downsides with it as well. So you have this free market of ideas, which in one sense is like the ideas should compete against each other, and that results in better ideas. But then what, I've kind of seen happening, and I think this is not just a phenomenon for our industry, but as you become, as ideas are really driven, rather than like ideological consistency, it's driven by attention, and you build an audience and you build a community that follows your content. You become captured by your audience, and then you need to deliver content that audience wants, regardless of the veracity of that content. So like there are people that basically make their whole business really on just like feeding up what they know, like red meat, I guess you could say, for their audience, regardless of like whether they believe it or not. You can see it in all sorts of kind of like niche fringe communities. I see it in Bitcoin and crypto. I see it in the vaccine debate and medicine. There can be, the truth is very nuanced. The reality is very nuanced generally. So there's generally not like just one pervasive idea that's 100% accurate. But when you build these communities, that's what your community wants, is just one pervasive idea that, their preconceived notions are not challenged. So yeah, I think that creates a problem where then it's no longer really a competition of ideas that's happening anymore, because there really isn't any competition. Like, people aren't hearing ideas that challenge what they think. They're just really kind of having reinforced beliefs on maybe even information that's not even real. So yeah, I think that's a weird dynamic, and I don't know what the solution to that is.
I mean, even in Bitcoin, you kind of see that happening, right? Even in Bitcoin, you see these different sort of islands forming where people have their own preconceived things. And that's what's so great about the conference we're putting up. That's a good way to work that in, right? Well, we do have a conference that sort of invites different positions, which I like.
Yeah, no, I feel like we've been kind of on the front lines of that some, because we have some very controversial things that we've given a platform to, or things that we've supported or whatever, not supported, and it's there's a real pressure, a strong pressure to deliver what your existing audience wants, like a very strong pressure. So
Yeah,
much
audience
so
capture, yeah.
yeah, so much so that if you deliver something that your audience doesn't want, you start getting phone calls in from sponsors, from advertisers, from supporters. Like the pressure is laid on you. So it's tough. It's tough to try to take a nuanced approach to topics when, especially with like the advent of social media, people's attention on a topic. It's not like they're reading a book. I feel like if you're reading, like if someone's engaging with you in a book, you can get fucking nuance. Like they're gonna give you the time of day to like hear out the argument. If you have 3 tweets, and sometimes you don't even get a full tweet. Sometimes people just read the first sentence in a tweet and that's all they need to like go. So it's like, okay, how do you have like a substantive discussion with someone that's nuanced when you have 7, 8 words to like, get them to engage with you?
Well, so how much of that, David, is financially driven? Because I feel like at least before, it used to be that journalism was almost like a public service, and people, like a lot of news divisions, for example, lost a lot of money and so on. And now it feels like kind of like what you're saying. It's another consumer good where people are consuming things that they want, and it's not really about truth anymore. So, I mean, obviously you're running a company that's delivering something and making a profit and so on. How much of that is? But how much of it is economic?
I think, well, first off, even though there's not like a market price of attention, like the dopamine hit that people get from attention might as well have a dollar amount on it. So there's like a bunch of like citizen journalists out there cultivating and building a community where they make no money, but like that hit, that rush they get when they get that 2,000 like tweet or whatever, that's enough payment for them to be like satisfied. I think, I'd actually say from my perspective, and again, I'm an amateur at this, from my perspective, probably business interest had more entanglement in the previous model, because like the journalist, they were kind of disconnected from the sponsor, because like let's say you have like a managing editor, and the managing editor has an editor in chief, and then the editor in chief responds to like a GM or a president or whatever, and so they're just focused on their story, and the business guys are trying to figure out how to monetize around it. But if a sponsor spends enough money at a media company, they make a call to up the pyramid of the organization, and like there will be blackouts on topics. There will be stories that are killed, like 100%. Like that still is happening, but like in the past, you could do it, and there's really no alternative vehicle to get that message or material out. Now, like especially with today's like day and age, I think one of the strengths of this like town square environment that we're in is like, okay, if some company wanted to pay us money to censor a topic, it would not work at all. Like we don't have the ability to do that. So like I think businesses have lost control of having this like unilateral control of the landscape. But then like they're in these like attention economies where people are trying to build their community. Like a citizen journalist needs to make $5,000 a month, whatever it is that their cost of living is. And so, that leads back to like the capture. They don't want to lose their audience because they need that for their income. So I don't know. I think it's changed, but I'd actually say probably for the better in general in terms of just like the information that's coming out, having many different conflicting perspectives rather than just like one unilateral view.
Well, the biggest thing that changed though is that people used to buy a newspaper, right? So you pay an amount for a newspaper, and then you get all the content in the newspaper, which is I would say a pretty healthy funding model for media. That's also kind of, again, I would say healthy in the sense that people also encounter articles they weren't necessarily expecting or weren't necessarily looking for. And nowadays, because of the advertising, like it's all advertising essentially. Like it all comes down to advertising, and that means it all comes down to attention, and that means it all comes down to algorithms, and it's basically just feeding the algorithm what it wants. That's sort of that's a shift. I don't know if that's good. I don't think that's good actually. I think that's probably
Yeah,
not good.
that's fair. No, I think
Like it would be better. Like,
content. It absolutely the incentives are aligned. Like the content creator is aligned with the audience consuming the content. Totally agree.
Yeah, ads are definitely sort of the currency now instead of like direct payment, like Aaron you were saying, and that does sort of like change everything because it's all about attention rather than truth, and you're serving sort of like a different thing because your users end up being the product, right? Like the people that are reading, they're not paying you, but the advertisers are. So it's your ability to capture the audience that becomes the critical thing. So let's dig down that hole a little bit. Like how does that change like what sort of stories come out, and how does that change what gets reported, and what goes out to the media, out to the audiences, I guess.
I mean, a lot of it, like I mentioned, is literally trying to feed the algorithm whatever it wants. It's really sort of discovering what the algorithm is interested in, which is a very kind of weird. You're not even really thinking about what people want. You're thinking about what the algorithm wants. Now, of course, the algorithms should be designed to give readers what they want in a way, but I mean, I think we're like the internet is still quite new, right? We're still learning so much and discovering stuff, and I really think that this is sort of a phase where everyone's just getting fat on sugar, and we haven't figured out how to actually create a healthy diet yet. I think we need to come up with better solutions, and there are interesting experiments, but I suspect that paying for media will probably have to be a part of that rather than just the attention grabbing techniques. But I mean, there's no real solution yet. I mean, there's successful pockets here and there. There are websites that have paywalls that are working, but there's also a lot of that's not a lot. It doesn't work very often, and so there's successful models, subscription models. There are things that are working, but just across the board, we're all still trying to figure it out, and that's the situation we're in.
Yeah, I would say the only, maybe only is the wrong word, but the media company that, in my mind, that seems to have figured it out the best is Disney. It's almost all driven by the end user. You buy tickets to their park, you buy their merchandise, you buy their movies, you buy their subscription products. Very little of their revenue comes from advertisers or sponsors, and I think like that's kind of a multi-pronged approach where you're building a vibrant community that wants to engage in a lot of ways is probably the best model that's out there. In terms of like how does the sponsorship dollars change the content? So I don't know if we're the best example to ask that to, because we're like a struggling media company. So like maybe our calculus is like done differently than like, some big media company out there. But like for us, like we basically have journalists that cover whatever they see as like the news, whatever is fit to print or whatever you want to call it. And then we have like a business team that's out there trying to find sponsors to support some line of programming. So like right now, the business team is like pitching sponsors on basically being like the title presenting sponsor of a mining section to Bitcoin Magazine. And we're going to just create mining content. They don't have any influence over that mining content, but like they get to be like the presenting sponsor of this like section of content that we're going to put a dedicated journalist on. So from our perspective, we look at it as like, hey, there's content that we wish we could cover, that if we had infinite dollars, we would already have a dedicated beat writer for mining that was like focused on that, but we just don't have the economics of it. So we're looking for kind of partners that want to ride along with our brand and support that type of content. And that would be like in addition to the content that we would just we publish because it's news. But again, we're a very lean operation at Bitcoin Magazine. I mean, even more lean this year because we reduced our staff significantly. So, like, I think at bigger media companies, the fact is I haven't really been involved in any media company that isn't struggling. Like, I'm on the board of a media company that's quite large, and I mean, they're just bleeding out of every orifice, and it seems like they're going to be toast like every other quarter, and somehow they always pull it through. And I feel like that's just been media for the past decade, is like just surviving. So yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that in a lot of places. It does seem like they're all kind of going, I guess, the business equivalent of living paycheck to paycheck, right? Like, just, all right, well, can we get a little money here, a little money there? It's very strange to me because in many ways, a lot of these older media companies used to make a decent amount of money, and they were. When Rupert Murdoch, for example, was going out and acquiring all these newspapers and TV stations and stuff like that, this was the strategy. It was a great business. I mean, has the internet like destroyed that? Like, why is it so? Why are the economics so bad?
Yeah, I mean, I think Aaron, nailed it. When you're able to sell, if every one of our readers paid us 50 cents every week, like, we'd be printing money. So it's very difficult to make that happen. And even like so you go for distribution, you want reach for your content. Okay, so we're active on Twitter. I think Bitcoin Magazine is probably maybe the biggest Bitcoin Twitter handle. Probably generates the most traffic of any Bitcoin Twitter handle. We'll publish a story on Twitter. Maybe like it gets 5,000 likes. Okay, maybe through Twitter, those 5,000 likes, it translates to 2,000 people that click through to the article. So like the amount of the amount of people who actually even read the content anymore is just unbelievable. Like, it's like, we'll get more shares on an article than we have people that read the article, which is wild.
Wait, that sounds really, something is off there. Like, there are more reshares of the article than there are actual views of the article.
Yeah,
is what you're saying.
Maybe I'm like being a little bit like maybe there's 50% more or something, but it's like it's within the spitting distance of the number of reshares of an article can match the distribution and reach of an article, especially if we're just measuring like traffic from Twitter specifically as a traffic source. Yeah, absolutely. And so it's
are there that many bots? What like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
I mean, there's probably also a lot of people that just retweet the headline, right? Like, the headline has the news. That's all that really matters to them. That's what they want to retweet.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
but yeah, bots is probably also an issue. I didn't think of that actually, but yeah.
I mean, if I just made content that had like spicy headlines, and then you click through the article and it was like, just kidding, that's not what happened. Like, our traffic would go through the roof. Like, our reach on Twitter would go through the roof. So yeah, I think there's a lot of people. Social media is a platform for them to this term is overused, but to virtue signal, to like signal to their peers what they're all about. And it doesn't actually matter what the content says, as long as they can kind of deliver something consumable by one of their peers that is like they get that like button.
I mean, is it that people are just reading much less? Like, I feel like people were reading much more, maybe, like back in the day when you actually paid a quarter for a newspaper, which probably inflation adjusted is like $1.25 or something. But
I mean, if you read 1,000 tweets, you've technically read more than an article, right? I do think there are statistics about this. I wouldn't be able to tell you what they are exactly, but I do think people today read more, in the sense of they read more words per day, like by a pretty big margin. If you're on your phone, you're just reading, right? Or like I said, on Twitter or whatever social media app you use, that's a form of reading. So it's not that reading time has decreased, but it's the length of it's just smaller bits of reading in general.
Yeah, so I think media companies have lost market share in terms of the time that they're able to capture from a user. but that's been cannibalized by platforms that have grown the pie, but they've also disproportionately grown their share of it, so it's still shrunk it for traditional media. I think that's probably why our conference, like our media company, relies on our conference to survive. So like the conference that we run, it's profitable. And I think the reason why it's profitable is because like the experience of an in-person event, like when people come to an in-person event, their attention and focus is there in the in-person event. Like during the 2 days, like if you were to take a stopwatch, I think they even have that on like they'll tell you how much time you're spending in an app on your iPhone. Like, you know, during the days of the conference, I bet you that like engaging with the content at the conference and talking to other people at the conference, we would be like the #1 app that someone is using during those 3 days, you know? So like those 3 days, just having someone's attention for 3 days is enough to build a full year of a business around. So yeah, I feel like events may be like the last frontier where a media company can still like make money and deliver a unique product that's kind of difficult to cannibalize in a digital format.
So I guess what you're suggesting is that the in-person events, the events, subsidize pretty much everything else, and you know, that's sort of the model that you've had to go to. Is that, I mean, to your knowledge, is that how other media companies are working? Because there's obviously a lot of competitors and a lot of different niche operators and media companies. So is that what they're doing?
I would say a lot of media companies. I mean, if you go through like the Forbes, the Fortunes, the Bloombergs, they all have pretty robust event businesses. I would say in our industry, every media company is trying to do that. You know, fortunately, there's also a bit of a, what do you call it? Kind of an economy of scale. So, you know, we've been very fortunate that as like more and more events come to crypto, we've been able to kind of maintain the top spot of an event. But yeah, I mean, you have The Block, you have Blockworks, you have CoinDesk, you have what's the
Swan.
podcast? Swan. So all doing events to try to tap into that revenue stream. The challenge is that an event, a small scale event, is not profitable. It loses money. So you have to hit the economy of scale to actually get to profitability on a conference.
So that's the business model now. Instead of information, it's more like a community experience, maybe, which is kind of strange to me for a media company, because that's not what news is about. I'm sure that's not what you went to journalism school for, Aaron.
Yeah, I didn't expect to be organizing conference. Well, I don't organize the conference personally. I actually do still write, luckily. But yeah, I mean, you gotta find a way, right? And this is a way that we've been able to find, so that's great. But no, definitely not what I. There weren't any classes on how to organize conferences in journalism school.
So since this is a conversation, I want to flip it on you, Jimmy. So like you're kind of like a one-man show media organization. Maybe not a one-man show. I don't know what your team looks like, but you do kind of smaller events. You do a podcast. You wrote an awesome book. You've actually written 2 books, right?
I've written 5.
Even more, yeah.
Okay, 5 books. So, like, break down like your revenue streams, like books compared to podcasts, compared to like in-person events. Like, how would you compare them?
Yeah, I mean, I think now that I think about it, and now that you sort of frame it in those terms, the books don't make that much money. The newsletter doesn't make that much money. The podcasts don't make that much money. Like a large share of my revenue comes from in-person events. It's like holding a class or something like that. And you know, like I'm doing it with maybe a slightly different focus. I'm actually teaching people how to code Bitcoin stuff, but that's where a lot of that stuff comes from. So I don't know, maybe this is sort of like the new model where you have to actively provide value to others to I guess get them to pay you.
Yeah, and I mean, you could do that teaching in a digital format, but it wouldn't be the same experience. So it's like people are looking for experiences. They're looking for, thank God everything's not digital is all I can say. Like people need like the human experience of like touching things and like actually talking to real people. So, but yeah, I think that model it works well. There's a lot of side events. It's been interesting to watch when we do the conference. There'll be like hundreds of side events that get organized around the conference, and like one that's done really well is these beefsteak. The beefsteak dinners, which are awesome. They're like kind of like a party, networking event, etc. But they're expensive to go to. And like there's been a real business that's been built around, just doing a carnivore dinner, 4 times a year, basically. And so I don't know. I think there's a lot of creativity that comes with events.
Well, I mean, it sounds like there's some sort of value that people are kind of demanding with these things, and you're selling to obviously a smaller group because the number of people that read the website versus come to the conference, I mean, it's probably at least an order of magnitude more that read and don't really contribute anything. I mean, is everything kind of going to this, like, I guess the event equivalent of a freemium model?
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you on that. I mean, I think, what I want Bitcoin Magazine to do, and maybe Aaron has a different perspective on this, but what I want Bitcoin Magazine to do is move really to more of a subscription model, where, we have one really amazing value subscription product and program where you get the print magazine, which I don't know if you've read the print magazine, but our print magazine is
well, I do write the back page every time, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
that.
the print magazine is an amazing product. It doesn't have the distribution it should have, and so like if we could do like a print magazine with like some new cool product launch that's happening from one of our partners, plus like a signed Jimmy Song book from your latest book you published, and we could like package that up in like a cool twice a year or 4 times a year like package of stuff. Like we could really give people that extra value and kind of affect people in more ways than just them reading an article. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, the business model has to be built separate to monetizing eyeballs on an article. I think that in and of itself is not going to get it done. The CPMs on a display ad have just gone to nothing. So,
Yeah, the other side there to sort of consider is that, so while the subscription model is great if it's economically viable, like that's the great benefit there, it also kind of sucks as a journalist when you write an article and a lot of people can't read it, right? You kind of want people to read your article as well. So if it's paywalled, it also, like, there's also that detriment. So that's another consideration.
This is where it feels like there is maybe room for like audience engagement that's different than just getting them to read your article, right? Like, because at least like with the in-person stuff, like you guys were saying, like they're very popular because you get to interact with people, you have their focused attention, they can hang out together. Does feel like that's where a lot of people are kind of wanting to or willing to pay money for. And I don't know, maybe like that's the direction that media goes towards. I know, for example, like Safety, when he does like his podcast, he has like his I guess the people that subscribe to his his website and stuff, like in the audience, and they can like actively ask questions, and that's something that they're willing to pay for. I don't know. I feel like that hasn't really been explored that much with this new media. Is that maybe a future that you guys can maybe see this see maybe?
I mean, I would say yes. I've always thought there's immense potential, and I mean, I think there's plenty of podcasts where people have talked about this, but immense potential with micropayments in media and what could be done with Lightning. I think a future where, you know, you have hundreds of millions of people or billions of people that have a wallet extension in their browser and are able to engage with content in new ways. I think there's all sorts of interesting stuff you could do. Embedded prediction markets where people can, you know, bet on something, or, you know, I've always loved the media content format of, do you remember, I think it's called Feed the Chickens, or Feed the Polo Feeds. It was basically like a live stream with a chicken feeder, and you can pay sats to it, and it would drop like, you know, some chicken feed, and then chickens live on the live stream would come and, like, you know, eat the food. And I think there was another implementation that was done at a strip club in Tampa where you could watch this live stream of the strip club and then pay the QR code, and it would make it rain on stage. So I think, you know, experimentation with basically in a digital format, allowing people to spend sats to affect the real world in some way, I think is a level of, you know, gamification or engagement that's unique and cool. And the math actually, you know, at scale actually gets kind of interesting. But it hasn't been done yet in a way that's commercially viable.
Yeah, just on the topic of micropayments more generally, so back in the sort of early internet days, right? That was sort of the first vision for just making the internet itself viable. Like, this was the stuff that David Chaum was envisioning, and this was why he wanted to create digital cash. Which, by the way, to also pitch that, I'm writing a book on the prehistory of Bitcoin. This stuff is in there. Will be released soon.
Aaron,
but
you
anyway,
are
so
really good at shilling things. All right.
Thank you. So that was sort of the original vision before the advertisement model took over. But the problem with that vision, as Nick Szabo at one point described, is that there's this mental cost for transactions. So even deciding if you want to pay to access a website, like, that's already, you don't want to deal with that. That's not even worth it. So you just not do it. Even though the money might be worth it, you don't want to make the decision, essentially. Like, that cost is too high. So that would be great, but like, the only way I could see it work if it's very integrated, like, it has to be very integrated in your web browser, like, very automatic. And there are what's this called? Can you guys help me? There was something.
Umbrel had like a browser that they were planning to integrate a lot of these sort of features or something.
I'm
Brave,
thinking
maybe.
Oh, was it Brave? Yeah, like this thing where you just say, I'll pay $10 a month, distribute it to every website I'm visiting, something like that. That could potentially work, I think. How is Brave doing? I've not heard about Brave for a long time. What's going on with?
I don't use them.
I know a little bit about Brave, because turns out I know the owner who bought the company or whatever, and I just found this out. So business-wise, they're not doing great. Product-wise, the Brave browser, I think, is the number 2 browser in the world right now.
Oh, really?
I use the Brave. Do y'all use the Brave browser?
I've never used it. I had no idea that it was number 2.
It's a fantastic browser. So I highly recommend it. The only thing
I just don't like the whole shitcoin thing.
Exactly.
You know, that's the problem.
So, you know, the original vision was, which I actually think someone still needs to do this, was it was Bitcoin enabled. They run an ad blocker. They block the ads. They replace the ads with their own ads, and then they rev share with the end user, and then they run basically their own ad network. So it's they got sued, which is why they decided to stop. And then they also and they kind of went to the model that Aaron was talking about, where they like distributed a subscription payment. But I think the concept of like opting into an ad network and taking a cut is a pretty cool concept. And I think it's very possible that Brave is actually going to integrate Lightning payments in the future. So that's not.
Are they getting rid of their token though? Because that's the thing that I objected to. That's how they funded the entire company, was selling this pre-mined token?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't. My guess is no. They're not getting rid of the token. They're kind of anchored to that. But I do think that they're going to be integrating Bitcoin into the browser, which is a cool step forward because they have hundreds of millions of daily active users. And so to roll out a Lightning wallet to all those users would be pretty crazy.
I look forward to somebody making an open source fork that only does the Lightning part, and then I can go use it.
Well, yeah, and they're open source, so you can fork them pretty easily. So.
Well, so I mean, I guess a question for you, Aaron. Like, as a journalist, are you willing to go and do some of this other? I guess you already have. You have your own podcast and do all this other stuff, but if you had sort of other experiences, or like if you had other ways to sort of monetize your presence, maybe, right? Like going and, talking about an article that you just wrote with, like basically the Patreon model where you have more personalization. Is that like attractive, or does that, or is that like just sort of yucky? I don't know. Like what how do you think about that?
I mean, it's not, at least the way you're selling it to me. It's not my ambition. It's not the reason I got into journalism, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if I would never necessarily object to it if it supports my work, and if that means I can do my work, and if it's, as long as I don't have to compromise on my work in any way, like that's obviously very important to me, then I don't necessarily have a problem with that, and maybe some variations of it might even be fun. I don't mind engaging with my audience, for example. That can be useful, even that can be positive. So I don't know. It depends. I'm not necessarily against it. It would be nice if you could do journalism, and that's just viable in itself without having to worry about too many other things. But we're just not really living in that world anymore, or at least it's becoming harder across the board.
Well, I mean, there are people that do manage to do that. I mean, I could think of like Tim Pool, for example, Russell Brand to some degree, although he's been canceled off of everything. But there are people that do it. It just seems like you need so much scale to make it work that it's really only reserved for the top tier of people. Like, is that like? How are you going to get journalists if it's not economically viable, I guess? I mean,
you got to always adapt with the times, right? So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But maybe can you be more specific about what they are doing? Like, what are you referring to? Because I don't think I know.
Oh, about like Tim Pool and
yes,
yeah. So they have podcasts. They write on Twitter. They have enormous audiences. They do tipping during the podcast, and you can see it like come in or whatever. That's like been a popular way that a lot of people monetize a lot of at least video or live video or something like that. I think most of them have some form of Patreon or something like that, maybe even special membership to like a private club or something. I think that Louder with Crowder guy does that, right? He has like the whole mug club thing. But there's many models by which a lot of these guys do it, but they usually require a big enough audience where you're getting essentially funded by them, and it's usually not a small amount. Paying a staff of 5 people even is going to be pretty expensive, but they manage to do it.
Yeah, I think that all the people that you've just named are in the top 0.0001% of content creators. So I think like if you look at Patreon, I'm kind of speaking out my ass here a little bit, but if you look at Patreon, like I think for you to crack like the top 50 content creators on Patreon, you're making like $1 million a year, and that's like the top 50 of I don't know how many millions of Patreon users there are. And then to be at that level, you're going to have some people helping you. So, you're making $1 million a year, but you have 3 people helping you create that content. Then at the end of the day, when you run the numbers, okay, you're making $500K a year, and then you're paying taxes and all this stuff. You're paying the rate to Patreon, etc. And then before you know it, you're basically just making the salary that you'd make, in corporate America. So, that's for the best, So it's tough. It's tough.
Well, I mean, do we have too many journalists? Do we have too many media companies? Like, just is it something that too many people are getting into, and maybe we just need the market to cull a lot of them?
It'd be great if we were the only media company that existed in our industry. No, I don't know. I think that's a tough one. Everyone wants to be in media, they think. So there's an infinite number of people who don't know how shitty media is that are looking at it like, I could do media.
Seems so easy, right?
Yeah.
It does. But I mean, maybe it's in that way a little bit like Hollywood, where a lot of people want to go in, but, only the top people make a lot of money, and everybody else is just sort of, I don't know, like living kind of a crappy job or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, do you guys see this? I don't know, like the role of media reducing, or I mean, do you kind of see your role continuing to grow as we go towards more of a sound money system, where maybe there isn't as much Cantillon money floating around? Because I suspect that a lot of media currently is being funded by newly printed money, right? Like, I think like the top advertiser on all the cable network news shows is
Pharma.
It's Pharma, right? Like, so like that seems like a pretty obvious like evil thing that's happening. Like, do you see that changing as we go towards Bitcoin standard?
I'm not convinced that it will change that much. So, but this is maybe an interesting topic because you just wrote a book about this. I haven't read it yet, but is this something you specifically mention?
It's not specifically, but I mean, I did think about writing something about it. I touched on it a little bit with politics and stuff like that, but yeah, not specifically media.
Right. I forgot the question now. What was your question?
Getting rid of the fiat standard, does that change the business model of media? And I think it does. I don't know exactly how, but I think if you took the top advertisers and went down the list of them, I think absolutely there is the more fiat income you're making from the printing press, the disproportionately higher you spend on media. I think that if you took away wars, if you took away subsidized medicine, if you took away the power of the political system, and therefore, political spending, because it's so valuable to win, that you would knock out a huge percentage of all revenue from media companies, and you'd bankrupt a lot of media companies. So it'd be interesting to watch. I think for our industry, we think that we have, as long as hyper Bitcoinization is playing out, there's an ever growing market for the content that we're creating. And there's there's this information asymmetry where there's a lot of people that are going to have to learn what Bitcoin is who don't know what Bitcoin is. So there's like an opportunity for us to exist for a while, but at some point in time, it's like once everyone's using Bitcoin, like, do we have really a role to play? Maybe just as like historians at that point in time, where we're just like, making the textbook or something. But
that's what I already am, David. I already started. Well, yeah. So to answer that question, I think it might, to an extent, change who the advertisers are, right? If we have a Bitcoin standard, then resources are gonna be be distributed a bit differently throughout society, but I don't see that it would necessarily change the model itself. The model would probably remain the same, right? I don't think that's necessarily a fundamental change.
Well, I go ahead.
Just to bring up something spicy and interesting and controversial. So, I have been thinking about, in the context of Bitcoin governance, soft forks, how consensus is massaged, let's say, or influenced, etc. Like, how will that play out in the future in media? Like, will you see basically Bitcoin politics replace politics, and there being competing ideological camps and content around those camps, and the business model around it? I mean, I thought your blog post was very interesting, Jimmy. I know you took a lot of heat for it. I'm glad you wrote it, the one on the user rejected soft forks. I'm actually in agreement broadly, even if I think I have a different view than you about the value of drive chains or these different things. But I generally speaking agree with you that at the end of the day, you need some sort of mechanism to reconcile where do people stand on something, and a world of many different UASFs or URSFs creates an interesting dynamic around the content and information that people need to make decisions. If every soft fork also had a URSF associated with it, there'd be so many forks of Bitcoin out there. That in and of itself would create an interesting dynamic of hey, we got a new Bitcoin Cash to sell every single month or whatever from a fork. So I don't know how the media landscape in Bitcoin changes when we think forward, not maybe a few years, but 30, 40, 50 years, when BlackRock wants to convince you that the fork of Bitcoin that they've selected is the actual version of Bitcoin. I don't know. I think it's some interesting stuff down the pipe.
Yeah, I feel like some of that played out in 2017 because you did have Bitcoin Cash, and Roger Ver used the Bitcoin.com media basically as a way to promote his thing, and they had their own podcast, and then they split again, right? And then they split again after that. So you have this very interesting experiment that we saw in real time, and what we found, I guess, 5 years later, is that almost there's that place is just crickets, right? Nobody's there anymore. They lost, and there's some few delusional people that think they've won, but they've lost, right? They're not relevant anymore.
That's on hard forks. We haven't really seen that dynamic play out yet on the software kind of soft fork frontier, which I think could be interesting. And especially when you think about there's going to be a hard fork that happens in 70 years or something like that.
Well, we don't know. They're possible. I mean, the timestamp issue is 2104 or something like that. But that's there are ways, there are clever ways to get around it that we haven't really discussed. But yeah,
if I'm an ultra cynical person and I'm BlackRock, I'm looking at okay, I got one chance to rug the entire ETF coming up in 80 years. I need to start laying the seeds today to try to convince everyone in 2104 that my fix to that bug is going to be the real Bitcoin and not something else. But I think the hard forks you're right about, but soft forks of Bitcoin, I think it's a messier picture.
Well, I mean, the thing is, every soft fork turns into a hard fork because you're gonna either resist it or if it's a user-activated soft fork, and this is what caused Bitcoin Cash to come into existence, was when you had the user-activated soft fork on one side, they knew that they were at a disadvantage. So they decided, okay, we're going to we don't want to get wiped out. We want wipeout protection. So they did a hard fork instead of what they could have done is just kept the soft fork and said, okay, Bitmain is going to mine on our chain and we're going to do it. But no one wants to get wiped out. So in any soft fork scenario, the side that would get wiped out, they're going to do something to make sure that it's a permanent fork. It's never going to come back and overtake you or something like that. So I don't know if they're going to be materially different. I mean, technically they are different, but the game theory just ends up such that you're going to have two different things and they're going to permanently separate because no one wants to get wiped out.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true. So one of the interesting things we saw in 2017 as well is the Bitfinex futures, right? So that was the SegWit2x hard fork that was going to happen. And before the hard fork actually happened, Bitfinex published the futures and people could start trading essentially the different coins before there even was a split. And because it became so obvious on these future markets with what the market preferred, the other side just gave up. So then you can actually prevent splits in that way, right? So if you have a UESF and a URSF, you can have futures markets for that, and the market can figure out what the market wants, but and then the other side can just give up, and we can sort of upgrade or not upgrade Bitcoin through that dynamic without necessarily creating the actual splits. So that would be a relatively clean way of doing these Bitcoin politics, so to say.
Well, I mean, so that would be interesting, and I suspect if there's like a market for it, that a lot of people will lose heart and so on. But we saw this kind of play out in a lot of 2018, where we had so many different forks, and they were, like they didn't make any sense, and like no one like I think I had a client that wanted to split some of his coins from like a while ago, and I looked up like a year later how many of those fork coins were actually available to trade on exchanges. At one point there were like 32, and by the end there was like 4, right? Like, and 2 of them were like Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV, and like maybe Bitcoin Gold and Bitcoin Diamond. That was it. Everything else, all this other stuff, Bitcoin Private and Bitcoin Interest and Bitcoin Faith and all this other stuff. Like there were so many that actually traded on exchanges, had a non-zero value. They all disappeared, right? Like that, and maybe that's talking about like the way these things kind of go. I don't know if media organizations can get supplied, because money does sort of have that network effect where you pile on to the one that's winning, and that's kind of where it goes. At least that's what it seems like to me.
Well, what about like a user rejected soft fork like okay, CTV? Let's say CTV is gaining momentum. Like what if like I like CTV. I mean, I like all this shit, and we try to avoid getting our media company like in it, because that's we have an agenda.
I don't know, David. You've been pretty pro ordinals. I'd say that was pretty obvious. But I mean, regardless, my personal view is not the view of Bitcoin Magazine. So we try to avoid keeping Bitcoin Magazine from getting too much into it, though we still get into it too much. But like, okay, like CTV, like if I were to like campaign against CTV, take all the criticisms that exist on CTV, push for a URSF for CTV, like could I get 3% of the nodes? Like what percentage of participants would I need to get to buy into a URSF to create a no CTV fork of Bitcoin? That's going to be traded on an exchange that someone's going to create futures of. That's going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars in trading volume. I think you probably could. You could probably take every UASF and you could probably have a competing URSF for it and get some percentage of people to buy in on it, which would be an interesting dynamic. Well, it would cost the people a lot. Well, go ahead, Aaron.
I think it will be a lot like the hard fork scenario we saw. Like the first time someone does it, it will work fairly well, and then the second time will be less, and then eventually, or not necessarily the URSF. Like the UASF site could also be the failing site. I do think there would probably be a very winner take all sort of dynamic, as we've seen with the hard forks. And so maybe the first time it kind of works, but then it just sort of fizzled out, and everyone realizes you just need to be on the right side, and otherwise,
you end up like those.
Well, you
poor
could of
people.
course just keep both sides of the coins, and then one of them will. That's always possible.
Have like a free option on the what happens.
But then you've lost a lot of money on the opportunity cost. The people that sold Bitcoin Cash when it was 15, 20, 30%, that they made out much better than the people that sold at 1% like 5 years later. So
yeah, sure.
All right. So anyway, let's try to wrap a bow on this thing. We are talking about new media and sort of the changes that we expect Bitcoin to see going forward, and maybe we do get sort of these kinds of topics becoming a lot bigger within the media as Bitcoin becomes more of a standard. But I guess as far as traditional media is concerned, do you see them changing their model? I mean, like perhaps I'm being very doomerish with them, but they seem to be subsisting mostly on Cantillon money at this point. What happens to all of that? Like, does it just kind of collapse? Like, I mean, you guys know about the traditional media landscape a little better than me, at least. So, like, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think absolutely it can collapse. I mean, I think you've started to see that actually this year and last year with some companies that were perceived as, massive media companies. BuzzFeed. I mean, look at BuzzFeed's stock price down 99%. I think absolutely it can implode. And, I guess in one sense, you would think that when a media company implodes, it creates business opportunities for another media company. But in the dynamic we're in right now, when a media company implodes, it just gets subsumed by social media. So, I think, the beautiful thing about capitalism is that no one can ignore it. Like businesses will always react to the incentives and always react to having to make money, but people can't make money out of thin air in a sustainable fashion. So if you cut off the printing press and there's not another alternative viable model, then they'll just go bust, and the executives will reward themselves on the way out the door at the cost of the shareholders and at the cost of the employees.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I see it more as a shift. The resources will shift throughout society if that happens, but the model of media will stay the same. So in that case, it's other sponsors or other advertisers, right? I don't see a fundamental change in media itself because of that.
Yeah, I think about it, and I do feel like it's going to be more individual driven, maybe personality driven, as opposed to in the past where, you could be a reporter for somebody and no one knew who you were really. Nowadays, it seems like you kind of have to have a personality to go with it, even in like sports journalism, right? Like if you're Shannon Sharp and you have a built-in audience, you can go start your own thing. If you're Pat McAfee, you can do the same thing, but you're Steve Young, like people know who you are, but you don't really have like a following per se. You've just been an analyst on ESPN for 20 years or something like that. So,
that's definitely a trend we've seen happen with the emergence of the internet as well. That's the individual journalists and the individual personalities have become more important than the brand of the media publication itself, or alone the brand. Yeah.
Yeah, which I find very interesting because that seems much more like what humans are built for. It's like you want to know the person as that's doing the reporting and not just the report itself. It's like that's how most people decide whether or not to trust somebody is by getting to know them or something like that. So
but you're also stuck with the Dunbar number, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's called, right? So
Yeah.
so you can't know every journalist. So it's sometimes useful if there's a publication and all right, they're probably pretty decent because I like what I've been doing so far.
Yeah,
I think there's still a place for that as well.
Well, this is where I want to kind of get away from, right? Like, is this idea of a trusted third party, right? I trust everything from the New York Times or whatever is on Fox News or whatever. That's the model that seems to be like exploited by the authorities to make us do whatever. So, I would like to see more individuals, and maybe you don't need more than 20 journalists that you follow or something like that, because maybe that's enough. I don't know. And they can sort of bring people under their brand and so on and recommend other people or something. But that seems to be a healthier way than let's just trust this monolithic company that I don't know what their business model is.
I agree with that. I mean, I think that would apply to Bitcoin Magazine well. But I think also what you lose in that is like there are new content creators, there are new journalists, there are new thinkers, and now like what's their way to capturing attention if like the only way is to be an apprentice of someone who's already trusted? Like it dramatically reduces your exposure to kind of new information sources. And if you think back across like, who do you follow in Bitcoin? I mean, Twitter is a great example of this. Like if you could only follow the Twitter accounts that you were following 5 years ago, and you can't follow any new Twitter accounts after that, versus what does your Twitter feed look like right now? I mean, so I think there is a lot of value in having low barriers to entry of not low barriers to entry, but having a vehicle, a platform for people to accelerate their discovery.
Yeah, I would also push back a bit against the idea that a media institution can simply be exploited. Because a media institution also has a reputation that it wants to uphold, right? So, if there is also a incentive for them to provide something to uphold that reputation. So I don't think it's. I think there's a place for that. I do also agree with the individual, and that's an actual trend, and I think that's probably a good trend. I still think there's a place for publication reputations as well.
Well, let's hope that things get better, because it does feel like the state of journalism right now is pretty rough, especially about the stuff that we all know we should know more about, like the whole Jeffrey Epstein stuff or the Google antitrust lawsuit. Just nobody covers any of that, right? Like on either side, because in a sense, like there are too many elite people that are kind of caught in the crosshairs or something. So I would like to see that change. I'm hoping that changes. Yeah,
the pandemic was unbelievably eye-opening, I think, for a lot of people in that regard.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll give you guys a chance to promote something that you guys are involved in. So I know you guys have a lot of people coming to this conference that are maybe not as familiar to the people that are in the United States, for example, that have a following in their respective European countries and so on. So can you tell us a little bit more about Bitcoin Amsterdam?
Yeah, Aaron, who are the most controversial speakers that we have from the Netherlands?
The most controversial one would be Eva Vladingenbroek.
Oh,
she's
okay.
the
I'm on a panel
protest.
with her. I didn't know who she was until like I looked her up. I was like, oh, okay, she sounds very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, she's definitely controversial within the Netherlands. I don't know. What are the other controversial ones? Do we have more, David?
I think she's the person that we got hate mail for sure. I like to judge speakers by how much hate mail we get around a certain speaker. It kind of like is almost like a counter signal to how interesting they are. And so she has generated a lot of.
Well, I was surprised when I looked her up on Twitter. 600,000 followers or something. I was like, okay, she's famous outside of Bitcoin. Like that's you don't get that many without like doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she's been on like Tucker Carlson's show, I think, and she's done some international stuff.
Okay.
I think I'm probably most excited about the Stella Assange, Edward Snowden panel that we're doing. We actually had Edward Snowden to Bitcoin 2019, the first Bitcoin conference we put on. And so cool to have him back. And yeah, I mean, I think what I get the most interest out of at the conference is seeing the things that people are building and tinkering on. I think we do a really good job of trying to showcase, like, I guess, the edge of innovation in Bitcoin. So of course we're gonna have like the Lightning enabled beer taps. I think what's his name? Ben Ark, Bitcoin Socialist, has some cool Lightning stuff that he's bringing to the conference. So yeah, I'm excited to see people in person. The Netherlands has a very good Bitcoin community and Bitcoin vibe, very OG Bitcoin vibe. So I'm excited to see people in person.
Aaron, you want to add anything?
I mean, for me, it's a home game, right? So that's always fun. The location is really fantastic. Like, it's in this old building, and the production value is just outstanding. I think it's the best-looking conference in the world, or at least the best-looking Bitcoin conference. Like, they got all the lights and like the whole thing is just pretty spectacular. So yeah, last year was a lot of fun. This year, one last pitch. I'm gonna start selling my book, which I'm pretty excited about.
I'm going to be autographing mine too, so we'll probably be at the same table or something.
Yeah, I'll have 21 editions, so it's going to be a limited edition, and I'll sign all of them.
Just
The regular
21?
release
You're
is
going to
gonna-
have only 21 there at the conference?
That's right. I'll only have 21 special limited editions at the conference, and then the rest
Okay.
is following a couple of months later.
All right. And
So,
you
yeah.
are making
No,
it
but I'm,
scarce.
One last question.
Looking forward to it.
So
Yeah.
autographed versions of your book, like, what do you sell those at a different price than non-autographed?
Yeah, well, I PGP signed my books, so that's a whole thing that I do. So you don't need a handwriting
The
expert
ebook?
to verify. So that's something that I've been doing since I published my first book, and yeah,
Oh,
I
dope.
plan to do that. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Awesome. That's it. And how much more does that sell for?
Well, so I've been selling the paperback, which is this version, for the autographed one for $50, and I'll have at least a few copies of the hardcover one, which which will be like $100 or something like that. And then
Dope.
yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fun, and yeah, looking forward to seeing you guys there. It should be.
Yeah, let's go.
And if you haven't bought your tickets, go to b.tc/Amsterdam. I believe that's where you can go buy them. So.
What's a good discount code? I should have asked the team before getting on. Aaron, do you have a discount code? Do you know one?
No, sorry.
Oh,
Wait, I have one. Give me 1 second. Amsterdam discount code. I do have a browser up and running. Code is Jimmy Song for 10% off. All
let's
right,
go.
there you
Thank
go.
you, Jimmy Song, saving people money all over the world. All right. Well, I look forward to seeing you guys in Amsterdam. Jimmy, I'm going to be at your book signing, picking up a book. Aaron, likewise. Don't sell out before I can get in that queue.
Get one of those 21.
So the first one, so there's going to be 21, right? The first one, so the book is called the Genesis book. So the Genesis book of the Genesis book, #1, that will be auctioned off, actually.
Okay. It should
can always
be
buy that
number
one.
0. It should be number 0.
Maybe. Well, I can still do that, actually. I don't know.
All right.
Maybe you're right. You're probably right, actually. Yeah.
I think if I is it height 1 or height 0? I forget like how blocks are numbered. Always get that mixed up. It's
Genesis
like,
block
It
is height
starts
zero.
with 0, right?
Yeah.
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 So that might.
I'll consider that. Good point.
You gotta do these things correctly. All right. Anyway, thank you guys, and looking forward to hanging out.
Yeah, likewise. See you, Jimmy.
See ya.
See you, Aaron.
All right. Unchained Capital is a sponsor of this podcast. I'm an advisor to the company. I know the team well, and I'm excited for what they are building. If you need multi-sig, collaborative custody, or a Bitcoin native financial services partner, learn more at unchained.com.